So, why do you think fintechs can kind of cover so much ground so fast?
So I think one, they just have massive amounts of people in their technology department, right? Just focusing constantly on these things. But we'll also launch what's called MVP, or minimum viable product, right? Whereas we seek perfection, or in my past we've always sought perfection, and the fintech's okay with letting it go out with a little chop to it, and then smoothing it out so long as it's lawful, and we don't disrupt too much, right? I mean, that's really the pace, and it's exhaustive and so energetic. And they believe we're dinosaurs, which is a little disheartening.
Like when you say we
The traditional,
industry.
the industry, they believe that, well, I shouldn't say fintechs as a whole believe that, but I have heard it, I've read it, listened to it, where they just believe that we think about it in a super traditional way. And that way that we think about it is really to ensure compliance, and because we have to, right? But we don't really pay attention to the experience that the consumer goes through. And so yeah, they're really focused on how do they, it's not really, I don't know that disruption is the right word, but it's really how do we deliver an extraordinary experience that consumers have looked for. That doesn't seem like that's disruptive, right? That just seems like that's what we should all be pursuing.
It's common sense, and one of the things I've been trying to think about our industry is why it's so hard to get the ball moved. And to some degree, it's what you mentioned. You're always busy with this. We're busy with compliance. We're busy with this. We're busy with comm. But it almost seems like a lot of our executives spend all their time kind of in the weeds in the business.
Absolutely.
And as I've talked to different fintechs and some what I consider to be pretty good leaders, they're up here working on the business and thinking about what are we trying to accomplish? How are we going to do it? What are the metrics? How fast should it be? And when you're working on the business, you can kind of keep your eye on what you want to get done. Does that resonate with you?
Totally, because I've always said, you're either working on the business, you're working in the business, and I think we are always working in the business. And I think the organizations that really work the best are those that have groups that manage the day-to-day, that work in the business, and then you have the group that is working on changing the business. That's where I've seen the most amount of success happen. If the same people who are working on the day-to-day are trying to change the business, the day-to-day always takes precedence over what's going to happen in the future, because most of the time we're just barely keeping our heads above water. I mean, I had great aspirations before I left and joined SoFi at Envoy, where I was the COO, and then the pandemic hits. Well, all of a sudden, that volume, limited resources, all the things that we had planned for that year are now backburnered to just trying to get the loans through the pipeline. And so I don't think that I was alone in that. I think the entire industry was going through that, right? So we have great aspirations. We're always going into a new year with great aspirations, and some of it gets done and a lot of it gets backburnered, because in the 30 years I've been doing this, I have found there's the year I plan and the year I get. And rarely are the two the same.
The year you planned and the year you get.
Yeah.
That's a great way of thinking about it. So contrast if you're working in the business, the year you plan versus the year you get, and working on the business. How does that differ?
So working in the business every day, it's pipeline management, it's working on files, it's working on the problems of the day-to-day, just the things that come to you. Working on the business is forward-looking, in my opinion, right? It's looking at technology, it's looking at the experience delivered to the consumer. How do we get there, right? What are all the things that are available to us to give the consumer an alike experience that they would get with somewhat immediate gratification if they went and applied at Bank of America for an auto loan, for example, or they go to, I mean, it's so cliche, you go to Amazon. I don't make a list to go to the grocery store anymore. I fill up my Amazon box, and when I've got enough in it, it comes to my house almost the same day. And that's what I'm pursuing in the mortgage space. I actually refinanced my own home about 6 months ago. And I was able to do it without ever talking to somebody, which I thought was super impressive. And the time when I did speak to somebody, it was to schedule the closing with the closing company. So I know that because of my experience, I can do that, but I thought, wouldn't that be nice for the consumers who want this experience? How do I get that? How does that become the norm? And you can go to Bank of America and apply for an auto loan and return in less than almost 3 seconds with an approval with a letter to take to your dealer. Well, I did that and it was for $70,000 despite that I only wanted 30, and I thought, wow, in a lot of markets, $70,000 is a home loan.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we're not probably gonna get to where it's that automated, but wouldn't it be nice to close loans in 12 days or 10 days or maybe 5 days?
So if you thought of the best available speed you could do, keeping in the the requirements for the CD and so forth, what should be world class for a real estate lender, knowing there's a couple things that have to have days attached simply because
Right.
of federal law?
So my goal for the past 2 years, when I look at it, how I want to deliver a mortgage, the best I think I can get it at least now is I'm going to 15 days and then 10 days. And then because of the requirements, I'm not sure that we can get beyond 10 days. But there's so much automation that if it weren't for the disclosures, we could close. We could do a point of sale approval. We could get the consumer closed in less than 5 days, pulling all the pieces together. So that which is meant to protect them is actually what is the barrier for them to close with speed.
When you think about why it's taken so long to adopt or adapt to changes, is it the agencies? Is it the industry? Is it our historical reference? What's holding us back?
I think it's a little bit of all of the above, which is part of what makes fintech so refreshing, is because they don't have all these biases, right? So I have to be careful in my conversations that I'm not just dragging all this bias with me. I have to protect the organization, but still let it move at that pace.
And when you say bias, you mean perceptual bias.
Perceptual bias, yes. And I think the entire industry is antiquated when you think about it from the way that fintechs think about the industry. The agencies
how do
haven't kept
fintechs
up.
think about it?
They think about how do we get it done now, right? And so you have to pay attention to the laws. They get that, right? And they're very conscientious of that, right? But all the other things like wait time, waiting for documents to come in, it's not about waiting. It's about making it happen now. How do I get to the source of it through automation? How do I push a button, waterfall all the things that I need to come back into my ecosystem almost immediately? And how do I do that with title? Appraisals, we're a long way from that, but all the other pieces, income, assets, we're getting closer and closer. We have income, assets, we can do the work number. A lot of mortgage companies are working on joint ventures with title companies, doing instant title. They're now working with Lemonade and others on insurance. So you're going to see more and more, I think, because then I'm working on this as well, is what can I get instantaneously? And then only people are focusing on those few things that I can't get instantaneously.
So when you think about direct source data, whether it's Form Free or Finicity or wherever, what can you get? What will the agencies accept? What are the hurdles to getting as much direct source data as possible?
Well, so I'm getting income, assets, the work number, right? I think right now the biggest friction point for me is consumers trusting the ability to go in and access their asset information. So that's more of a consumer challenge that we're working through, and I think that has a lot to do with how it's told to them and conveyed to them by the loan officers. But I don't know that it's the agencies. I mean, D1C to me was a game changer, but yet like less than 30% of the industry is using D1C, and that's shocking to me. So I think we can get probably right out of the gate income, assets, credit, obviously, homeowners insurance, title, I think that's pretty much,
That's
with
pretty much it.
the exception of the appraisal, if you have a PIW, which I think that's like 30% of the end, it was 40, I think it's just starting to move back down now, but let's just say it's somewhere between 35 and 40% of the market, at least on refis. Why does it take 45 days to close a refi?
If you were giving advice to your industry peers, knowing what you know now, having been in the industry for a couple years, what advice would you give?
Well, I actually give this advice to my peers a lot, is that I don't think that people really have made that transition to thinking about the business from what technology can do for it. Through RPA, AI, I mean, there's so much that tech can do, but I think that we all came up in it just a hyper manual process, and so we think of it as our people protecting our people, and we need to move away and give our people the tools and the technology so they get to do the good work and the fun work, and not all of the task management. And so I'm actually surprised when I'm talking to my peers how few of them are thinking about technology.
And is that because they're in the business? They're spending so much time in the business, or on the business, or?
I think it's both, but I also think they haven't read your books.
You're too kind.
I really do, because I think so I had the opportunity to work for Sutherland Mortgage Services, and working in the BPO space and seeing the business from a different perspective of truly manufacturing quality with speed and efficiency, and doing that through as much automation as possible. So that was a real game changer for me. And so I don't know if people who haven't had that experience make that connection to what could it be with automation. I also see that people, I think they think it's more burden to try to, one, I gotta learn it, then I gotta figure it out and implement it. And so I think that change is gonna come, it's slow to happen for anybody. Because I think you have to have that wow moment when you're seeing something and you just, wow, that could revolutionize how my processors do their work and my underwriters do their work. But I also hear people saying, well, automation is gonna remove jobs. It's whether it is or it isn't. I mean, automation is inevitable. It's whether or not you're going to be part of it, or you're going to be either part of who implements it, or you're going to be a victim of it.
I think of automation as not necessarily eliminating jobs, but restructuring someone so they spend more time using the talents they have to relate to the customer, or thinking about how to make the process better, or thinking about that whole customer experience, versus I got to figure out how income was calculated in this 1003 and I'm just kind of slogging through it.
Yeah, and if you think about, like, when I look at my verbatims on my NPS surveys, most of the time, it's how long it takes and the lack of communication. And to me, the lack of communication stems from the processors are heads down, working ridiculous hours, managing tasks and paper, where there's automation that could help them, to your point. And that's where I'm headed, is how do I give them a better quality of job, quite frankly, than the one that they have through having tools. I remember, I tell people all the time, well, remember when we went to DU, everybody thought underwriters weren't gonna have jobs. Underwriters have a better job because of DU, right? And I think that's, I think and this is just my opinion, but education is so critical. I'm constantly telling my employees what got us here won't get us there. And I think that if you're not constantly keeping up with the trends and you're educating yourself on the art of the possibility, then you always have a lens towards what you've always done. And what you've always done, quite frankly, is a lot easier than what's proposed as well.
You're describing driving the car, looking in the rearview mirror.
Yeah.
Change topics. You're a CMB. What difference has becoming a CMB made for you?
Well, Griff Strauss, when I heard him say that it would be like being an accountant without a CPA. And I heard that earlier in my career, and I thought, wow, that's super important. I think going through the whole process turned me into a lifelong learner. It made me realize that what's happening in the industry is constantly changing, and that to be a CMB means you need to be abreast of what's happening in the industry. You need to invest in yourself and constantly looking towards the future and representing the industry, your company, your clients, your employees with the highest degree of ethics. Because mostly everything I do, I think about it from the eyes of how would people view what I'm doing, right? I don't do it because of the money. I do it because it's the right thing to do for the industry. And whether it's one of my customers or one of my employees, ultimately, that's part of the industry.
What should the CMB Society, what should we do to encourage more people to take advantage of becoming CMBs?
That's a great question. I don't know that enough people know the value of it. I don't know that we do as much, I don't want to say advertising, but I don't know that we're as front facing in the industry as we maybe could be, because I'm surprised at how few people pursue the CMB.
If you had two equally qualified candidates, one had the CMB, one did not, what would you do?
I would hire the CMB.
Why?
Because of the investment they've made in their education and their dedication to the industry.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And
people, it's not an easy thing to become a CMB,
oh, I know.
right? I mean, when you get a CMB, you have earned that level of distinction.
No, absolutely. I think with the meeting a little later today, because we're at the MBA, it's always interesting just to see the number of people that are there, but also the number of people in the industry that haven't tried to get that designation. And it's like anything, it's a climb up the steps, but it's not impossible. It's just a climb up the steps. You have to take your time.
So Jen, when I got my pen, I did my orals in Washington, and I got my pen in Washington right after I did my orals, and when they pinned that on me, I cried. It meant that much to me, and that journey was that powerful for me. Last night I was having dinner, and one of the women at the table says, yeah, I want to get my CMB, but I just don't have time, and I said, you'll never have time until you make time. But that time will be well spent.
Brian Handel pushed me to go through the program, and I did it in 2009. And Griff was actually one of my oral examiners.
Oh wow!
It was really a worthwhile experience. And at the beginning of it, I kept telling, just what you said. I kept telling Brian, I just don't have the time. I got a business to run here. I cannot take the time. And he looked exactly what you said. He said, Jim, you need to make the time. You need to work on your credentials and your abilities, not just work in the business, work on it. And that's really when I started thinking about this working on the business, working in the business, which is actually the subheading of the next book, which is really work on the business, not in it.
Yeah, but you have to work on yourself constantly, right? And that's what people don't seem to understand. I'm surprised when I see people who move up, and good for them that they've moved up, but they moved up, maybe they're battlefield, promoted because of things that are happening, but they're not investing in themselves. And I can't think of a better way to spend your time than investing in yourself and honing your craft, right? I mean, and now we think about it in terms of, like, I joined SoFi, there was so much I didn't know about technology. A lot of the engineers and the people that I work with come from Google, Facebook, and Amazon. Well, I wanted to learn and know how to, I didn't tell them I didn't know what they did. I went out and learned what they did so that I could be in a conversation with them. And yeah, I'm not an expert, but I can hold my own. But through that journey over the past 8 months, I understand technology from a whole different perspective. I understand how Amazon thinks about getting things done, how Facebook does, how Google does, and that just makes me a better mortgage banker, right? If there was a CMB2, I'd probably do that.
So if you had to just summarize the fintechs, particularly Amazon and Google, how do they think and how do they operate so fast? What's their mindset? What are the engineers thinking? What have you picked up as a mortgage banker that you feel is really a valuable thing to know and you might pass on to colleagues?
So we do everything in sprints, and they're week sprints, so we get a ton done. Because if you think about in a month, you've had 4 sprints, you know, whatever it is you're achieving, at the end of each sprint, you've made a change to something, right? Never moved that quick in traditional mortgage lending. Didn't matter where I was, we never moved that fast. They're also looking at I love this concept of this PRFAQ. So we write press releases about what we're going to do. So we start with the very end, and then we work our way back. Instead of starting at the back and working our way forward, right? What is the most meaningful thing that you can do for the consumer? What are the steps in providing that? And then they're broken down into these sprints, and we execute those. And that comes out with your minimum viable product, and then you continue to iterate.
So it's a
Just continue.
never-ending
Never
journey.
continue, yeah.
And the PR FAQ, which I think is a really interesting concept.
Very interesting.
That's thinking about, at the end of the day, how am I going to be working on the business to get to that point? Put the time dimensions in, and then you've got scoping done as to what this should look like and what the experience should be to the consumer.
Yeah, because you're basically writing a press release, right? Like, here's what we're going to do, here's the value of it, here's the impact for the consumer, and how did we get there?
And how fast it's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So you put a date on it.
Yeah.
And essentially say, by this date, we're going to be announcing this.
And then you put squads on it to do this. Now, the PR FAQ is not something you release, right? But it is something that gets you, the whole organization focused on what that end result's going to be.
So if I thought of traditionally the way companies operate, it's what are we going to do, how are we going to do it, why are we going to do it? What you're describing is why.
Why is the beginning.
Why is what we're doing, and it's the PRFAQ. How we're going to do it is kind of the thesis of what that minimum viable product and the tech stack that runs it. And the what is sprint number 1, sprint number 2, sprint number 3, sprint number 4. So it's almost the reverse of the way of traditional thinking of what, how, why. It's why, how, what.
And everything is about what is the value or the impact for the customer. Right, our stakeholders are not the customers. The customer, the person who's going to be living in that home, financed by our loan, is the customer. What does this mean to them? How do we make that experience, how do we bundle it and make it as good of an experience as it can? And when you think about it in terms of that, you start picking apart all the things that are friction points, right? From the delivery of the documents, the burden it places on the consumer, going out and figuring out the utilities in a new marketplace, finding a new insurance company, even if it's a refi, there's still things that you can do on behalf of the customer to relieve the burden and make it more seamless to them to get their mortgage.
So in your mind, the why is customer experience. It's going to be
speed, and for my why is speed, transparency, accuracy. I had a fourth one, I lost what the fourth one was. But how do I get them surety at point of sale? How do I get them to close as fast as possible with as least amount of involvement from them? And how do they stay up to date and know what's happening without having to do anything?
That's the why.
That's my why.
Awesome.
Mm-hmm. Because I believe, I just want to leave you with this. I don't think anybody buys a mortgage. I think they're trying to buy a home. Right? And they're trying, and the mortgage is the financing vehicle that makes that dream come true. But the mortgage piece of that is also the piece that causes the most amount of discomfort and anxiety. So instead of celebrating, I'm buying a home, you're running through a gauntlet of work that is often not transparent and it's not customer friendly. And I think we can do a lot better.
I'd like to take you through that again, but I'm going to set it up with a question.
Okay.
And you just made a superbly great point, and I want to use that as kind of a bite, if that's okay. So Ken, we're talking about customer experience for mortgage. What's the customer really have in mind when they're going through this application process to buy a home?
Well, I think what they have in mind is, how do I get into my home and start my life in my new home with my family But what the reality of it is, 40 to 60 days, or 45 to 60 days of running a gauntlet, a maze of unfamiliarity, pulling documents together, trying to get approval, constantly wondering where I am in the process, and ultimately they just want to buy a home, right? Not buy a mortgage. And so, from my perspective, is how do we make that as easy as possible?
And that's your why.
That's
How do you
my
get
why.
the customer to get the home of their dreams with the least amount of friction as fast as possible?
That's exactly right. When they find their home, I want the mortgage piece to be so simple that they're focused on the curtains, the carpet, all the wonderful things of buying a home, not the days of slugging through getting to that mortgage. I mean, I think it's unconscionable that the average time to get a CTC, a clear to close, is 45 days into a process, and you don't know what's happening during that process, right? You don't even know if you're going to close on your home of your dreams. We have, as an industry, have to change that.
Kim, really appreciate your time. It's great to spend a few minutes, and I've always enjoyed just watching how your career is moving, and I think the perspectives you bring of being in an analog world and a digital world, both are great places, but I think when you can kind of see both kind of experiences, it'll make you a better CMB. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jim, because I'll tell you this, that reading your 3 books has helped form how I think about the industry and going forward.
You're super kind. Thank you so
Great
much.
books.
All right, thank you. Cheers.